doing here? If we have the expression ax squared plus c, in order to find the factors, we're going to check that both terms are perfect squares, okay? And if not, then we're going to divide both terms by a and see if it helps us through simplifying, if possible. We're going to rewrite. And the reason why we rewrite is because we use what we learn about factoring. If I'm in the form of x squared minus c squared, I can factor down to x minus c times x plus c. Then we're going to take the square root of both terms. And then we write them as factors. And if you're unsure, you should always check your answer by multiplying, aka FOIL. Okay? All right, so we are in the form of 2x squared plus 8. Are 2 and 8 perfect squares? They're perfect squares? No. So because they're not perfect squares, then we're going to start off with, we're going to divide by our a. So step 1, we're dividing by a. And if I'm dividing each one by 2, that's going to leave me with 2x squared plus 4. What are your questions in step 1? No questions? Because 2 and 8, are they perfect squares? No. So they won't allow us to use that rule. That's why I said all comes together. All right. Step 2 is we're going to rewrite it as difference of 2 squares. So we're going to rewrite it as a difference of 2 squares. So it's going to become 2x squared minus negative 4. And the reason why we do that is so that we can factor by taking the square root. So we can take the square root of each term now. So step 3 is to take the square root of each term. Dots, difference of 2 squares. So I'm going to take the square root of each term. And I'm going to write my factors. My GCF is still there. What is the square root of x squared? X. What is the square root of negative 4? 2 what? 2i. If there's a negative underneath the square root, you have to include the I. The negative from last Thursday? Or 2 Thursdays ago at this point? Okay. And when we take the square root of something, it produces a positive and a negative. So my other factor is x plus 2i. And this would be my factored answer. If I was not sure, then I will use FOIL and distribution to recheck. Questions? Okay. Let's look at number 2. So number 2, looking at my A and my C, are they perfect squares? 9's not perfect? Is 1 perfect? I'm pretty sure 1 times 1 is 1, y'all. So they are perfect. So step 1, we're good to go. Step 2, I'm going to rewrite them as difference of 2 squares. So that gives me 9x squared minus negative 1. And now that it's difference of 2 squares, I now can take the square root of each term. After taking the square root of each term, that gives me 3x, 1 what? 1i. And for every negative, there is a positive. And that would be my. And if I don't trust what I have, then I'm going to use what? FOIL. Okay. What are your questions about those 4 steps? Questions, comments, concerns? Remember, taking the square root of a negative, you're going to have an I, and you're going to have a positive and a negative version of the root. All right. So on your part 3 of your classwork for this section, you have 4 problems, and you'll be able to actually come back and check them. So within the notes on Canvas, you can come back and check your answers to make sure you did it correct. Because you still got to do the work. Yes. I told you guys to review. So last part of D, decide if we're going to solve full on. So finally solving a full problem. So we've been learning little bitty skills to get here. First, you decide if you want to use the quadratic formula or if you want to complete the square. Most of the times I will encourage you to use quadratic formula, less errors, less possibility. That's your x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of 4b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. We didn't finish. All right. So here we go. Completing the square example. So this is our completing the square example. So if you remember the steps for completing the square, step 1 is to move your c. So to move your c term. So what is our c term here? 5. So how do I move 5? Subtract it. So I'm left with x squared plus 2x plus nothing now equals negative 5. Good? And step 2 is we're going to find what we called our magic number. And your magic number is your b term divided by 2 squared. So my b is 2. So what is 2 divided by 2 squared? 1. And now I'm going to add that to both sides. So I add the magic number. Add a little bit of magic to it. And that gives me x squared plus 2x plus 1. And what I do to one side of an equal sign, I have to do to the other side. Step 4 is to factor. So step 4 is to factor. What multiplies to give me 1, but adds to give me 2? 1 times 1. So that's how we end up with x plus 1 squared. And what is negative 5 plus 1?
4.
Negative 4. Your last and final step is to solve for x. What do I need to do to solve for x? Square root. I'm going to take the square root of both sides. That gives me x plus 1 equals plus or minus negative 2i. What is left for me to do to get x by itself? Subtract 1. What I do to one side, I do to the other. So we now know that x equals negative 1 plus or minus 2i. Because you took the square root of a negative. When you take the square root of a negative, it produces an I. So that means that this graph would be floating and not touching the x-axis. Okay? All right. About to ring. It's about to ring. All right, last piece, quadratic formula. Again, quadratic formula is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. So with the quadratic formula, step 1 is to identify your variables. My variables are a is -4, B is 6, and C is -3. Step 2 is to plug the bad boys in. So I have -6 plus or minus the square root of 6 squared minus 4 times -4 times -3 divided by 2 times -4. Are there any questions about where everything was plugged in at? And then we just, step 3 is you just simplify. You start cleaning all of this up. So you keep going. And now I have -6 plus or minus, and I'm gonna do my discriminant, which is 36 minus 48 over -8. Because it's 2 times your A, and my A is, and we have -6 plus or minus the square root of -8 divided by -8, which equals -6 plus or minus 2i square root of 2, all over -8. Step 4 is to simplify. If I can divide, if there's a GCF between all of my outside coefficients, then I use it. What is the GCF between my coefficients? 2. So my answer is x equals -3 plus or minus I square root of 2 over -4. So you have the choice to either do completing the square or the quadratic formula. That's the formula. So you have 4 of them to do. Which one however you choose to do it is up to you. I encourage quadratic formula, less error. And then you can come back and check your answers. They are part of the notes. Okay. All right.